I'm not surprised that Worf and Dax's Star Trek Deep Space Nine wedding didn't have these characters attend. Worf and Jadzia Dax's wedding in Star Trek Deep Space Nine is one of the franchise's most emotionally loaded celebrations. On the surface, it's a joyful milestone. A Klingon warrior and a centuries-old joined Trill committing themselves to one another in the middle of an escalating galactic war. Dig a little deeper, though, and the ceremony is also tense, awkward, and riddled with absences. Fans have spent years asking the same question. Why didn't certain major characters show up? Here's the thing, I'm not surprised at all. In fact, once you really look at where DS9 was as a story and what those characters represented, their absence makes perfect sense. Worf and Dax's wedding isn't supposed to feel like a classic Star Trek reunion episode. It's not meant to be comfortable, nostalgic, or packed with familiar faces smiling in the background. It's a wedding shaped by war, politics, culture clashes, and unresolved personal baggage. The guest list reflects that. A wedding that was never going to be fun. Before getting into who didn't attend, it's worth remembering what kind of wedding this actually was. This wasn't Troy and Riker's joyous, sweeping next-generation finale moment. Worf and Dax's ceremony happens under the shadow of the Dominion War, with Starfleet stretched thin and characters emotionally exhausted. Even the tone of the episode leans into unease. Worf is visibly conflicted, pressured by Klingon tradition and family expectations. Jadzia, for all her confidence, is navigating rituals that openly demean her. There's drinking, fighting, shouting, and very little warmth until the final moments. This isn't a party anyone would travel halfway across the quadrant to attend unless they absolutely had to. Which brings us to the missing faces. Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Let's start with the name fans mention most often. Jean-Luc Picard. On paper, Picard attending makes sense. Worf served under him for years aboard the Enterprise D. Picard was Worf's captain during his most formative Starfleet experiences, and there's genuine mutual respect between them. But emotionally, Picard would have felt completely out of place. Picard never truly understood Worf in the way DS9 does. On The Next Generation, Worf is often the stoic outsider, defined by honor and duty, but rarely allowed emotional depth beyond that. Deep Space Nine cracks him open. It shows his insecurities, his need for belonging, and his tendency towards self-sabotage. By the time Worf marries Dax, Picard represents an earlier version of Worf's life, one he has outgrown. Inviting Picard would turn the wedding into a symbolic bridge between two eras of Star Trek, and that's exactly what DS9 avoids. This series is about moving forward, not looking back. Beverly Crusher. If Picard's absence makes sense, Beverly Crusher's is even easier to explain. Crusher barely interacted with Worf on The Next Generation, and her relationship with Jadzia Dax is essentially non-existent. More importantly, Crusher represents Starfleet's medical and emotional idealism, calm, compassionate, and orderly. Worf and Dax's wedding is none of those things. This ceremony involves ritualized screaming, Klingon alcohol, and traditions that openly question the bride's worthiness. Crusher, as a physician who prioritizes consent, well-being, and dignity, would probably be deeply uncomfortable watching Jadzia endure Klingon rites designed to test her pain tolerance. Her absence avoids a tonal clash the episode doesn't need. Geordi LaForge. Geordi LaForge feels like the kind of character who should be there, loyal, friendly, and endlessly supportive. But that's exactly why his absence fits. Geordi's relationships tend to be gentle and uncomplicated. He struggles with romance, yes, but he values harmony. Worf and Dax's relationship, by contrast, is intense, confrontational, and built around cultural friction. Geordi would be a polite guest standing awkwardly in the corner, unsure when to smile and when to duck for cover. His presence would soften the edges of the episode, and DS9 is deliberately sharp here. Sometimes absence isn't about dislike, it's about tone. Deanna Troi. Troy not attending actually says a lot about how Deep Space Nine treats emotional intelligence. Troy's role on The Next Generation is often to articulate feelings the crew can't or won't express. On DS9, those feelings are front and center. Worf's doubts, Jadzia's frustration, Sisko's unease, all of it is explicit. Troy would have nothing to do here. Her empathic insight would either be redundant or intrusive. Worse, she might highlight just how unhealthy parts of the wedding process actually are. DS9 doesn't want an outside voice analyzing Worf and Dax's dynamic. It wants the audience to sit with the discomfort. Alexander Rozhenko. Now, here's a controversial one. Alexander, Worf's son, feels like someone who should be present at his father's wedding. And yet, his absence is tragically consistent with Worf's character arc. Worf is not a good father. That's not a hot take. It's a recurring theme across both TNG and DS9. Alexander represents Worf's failures, his inability to balance Klingon ideals with real emotional responsibility. Having Alexander at the wedding would force Worf to confront those failures directly. Instead, the episode focuses on Worf's identity as a Klingon and a husband, not as a parent. That's not accidental, it's avoidance, both by Worf and by the narrative. It hurts, but it tracks.